Welcome back, party people. Factor Markets, the supply of labor. In this video, you will learn how to derive the labor supply curve and how the battle between more money and more leisure affects the slope of the labor supply curve. Can't wait, let's get to it. Alright, so we have the supply of labor. Really, this is a battle between two things, and so we have, if you notice, each axis, we have our vertical y-axis is labeled hours of leisure, and the x is labeled as hours of work. So we are comparing work versus leisure, and we see that they are negatively related. So we can use more of our time for leisure. That means less of our time for work, and vice versa. So how do we decide work versus leisure? Well, first we have a term called time allocation. So that's talking about how many hours do we spend on different activities. All right, so this idea of how we allocate our time between various things, including work versus leisure. Speaking of leisure, what is leisure? Well, in an economic standpoint, we're not just talking about laying in a hammock at the beach, although that is certainly one form of leisure. We're talking about leisure is going to represent time available for any other purpose besides earning money. So when we look at that model again, we're really breaking time down into two aspects. One is earning money, so working, and everything else is leisure. So all 24 hours of our day will be spent in either leisure or employment, earning money, including things that might not be so great, like watching your kids fight. Don't have kids, PSA. All right, we have an individual supply curve, and this is going to show us how the quantity of labor supplied by an individual depends on that individual's wage rate. In other words, depending on whether their wage is high or low, it's going to actually influence what their individual labor supply curve looks like. If you want to see that supply curve, you got to wait until the next slide, which I'm going to go to now. All right, welcome back. Next slide, and look at this. We have our individual labor supply curves. So you see two different things, and they're not exactly shaped the same way. We notice that, all right, so the first one is just a typical upward sloping supply curve. That's probably what we would expect. Notice that the y-axis is labeled as wage, the x is quantity of labor, and so this is showing us as the wage increases, the quantity of labor increases. That's probably what we expect. So this is the first one. This will be upward sloping if the substitution effect dominates. So this is taking us all the way back to like unit 2, I think, substitution effect compared to the income effect. So we got to get a quick refresher on those two terms. The substitution effect essentially is the idea that if one good becomes more costly, we want to switch to the cheaper activity. In this case, we're talking about leisure, and what's happening is if we're getting a higher wage, so if the wage goes up, leisure is becoming more expensive in terms of opportunity cost, because we have to give up more money. So if we were earning $10 an hour, our opportunity cost of leisure was $10 per hour. Now if we get offered $20 an hour, the cost of our leisure time, the opportunity cost, is up to $20. So the substitution effect says higher wage will increase the quantity of labor. So we'll have an upward sloping supply curve. However, what if the income effect dominates? And in this case, you see where that supply curve actually starts pulling back to the left. It becomes what's known as a back bending or backward bending individual supply curve for labor. It can actually become downward sloping. In this case, and that's what you see there, it becomes downward sloping if the income effect dominates. The income effect says that as we become richer, we want to work less. We want to have more leisure is the basic idea. So as we get offered more money, so instead of making $20 an hour, we're going to make $40 an hour, we might actually want to work fewer hours because of that income effect. Maybe we feel like we don't need to work 40 hours anymore. We can just work 30. We'll still be making more money, and we'll have more leisure. So, ... At lower wage rates, the substitution effect typically dominates. Now, the reason for that, going from $8 to $12 an hour, that's a huge increase in money, 50% raise. But that's probably not enough for you to feel rich and to feel like I don't need to work anymore. So, in fact, if you go from $8 an hour to $12 an hour, you're probably going to be willing to work more hours than you were before. So we have the upward sloping supply curve. On the other hand, at higher wage rates, the income effect eventually dominates. So if we're talking about somebody going from earning, a large amount of money to an even larger amount of money, there's a good chance that they're going to want to work fewer hours so they can take advantage of that higher income and have more leisure time as a result. So since the individual labor supply curve contains both upward and downward sloping segments, it is said to be backward bending. So on the right side is probably your best representation of an individual supply curve, but I want you to expect questions that will deal with the idea of it being different depending on whether you're at a low or a high wage rate. All right, and finally, what will cause the labor supply curve to shift? To increase, shift to the right, decrease, shift to the left. First one, changes in preferences and social norms. So for instance, when women were really and truly allowed into the workforce, we see a large shift to the right in the labor supply curve. When we have increases in population, the labor supply curve shifts to the right, it increases. When there are more opportunities in other fields, we see a shift to the right. And when there are changes in wealth, if we're getting wealthier, it will shift it to the left because fewer people will want to work as many hours because they feel richer for other reasons. So just keep those things in mind for shifts of the labor supply curve. This has been a LaMoney production.